Hey there, y'all. It is Stephanie Renee here. Um, I'm going to talk about planning a funeral. Planning an unexpected funeral, maybe, is what I should say, because um, dust on my computer. It's obsessive. I can't stop. Anyway, um, I would say, before I say anything else, that I absolutely encourage everyone to talk to your family, your partner, your whoever you have, your close friends, about your wishes if something was to happen unexpectedly. Nobody wants to talk about that kind of stuff. My oldest daughter, when Julian died, she was telling me one day, a few months after he died, she said, "Well, Mama, when I die, I want this." And she started, and I said, "No, no, no, I don't want to hear it. I still haven't brought myself to that point. I couldn't even tell my kids my wishes if something happened to me. It's just sad to think about, but we should, to make it easier for our loved ones and so that our wishes are met. And if nothing else, write it down on a handwritten piece of paper and put it somewhere where it can be found. And, I know that seems so dark, but we just don't ever know what's going to happen. And Julian and I had been together for a long time, and it was something that did come up in conversations that we had. And at one point, a place where he worked, he had life insurance, and he had discussed it with me when he signed up for the life insurance, and was telling me, if I don't want to be cremated, if I die, I want you to do this, I want you to do that, and I want you to take the money and do this or that if you. And I would always brush it off. I was like, I don't want to talk about stuff like that. I just don't. I just can't. But I did know some of the things that he wanted. I did know that he did not want to be cremated, I did know that he did want to be buried here in the United States where his children are. I did know that he wanted an Adventist service with his favorite gospel song playing. And so those were things that I had no question about. My mother had suggested cremating him because it was the cheapest method. But I could not have done it even if it was his wish. I have to be honest about that. I just couldn't do that to him. I think I would have had nightmares thinking of his body burning like that. So it's just something I couldn't have done anyway. But, my mother said it, and I said, "Mom, I can't do that." I said, "Would you want me to do that to you or Daddy?" And she said, "No." And we got the cheapest funeral that we could get. We got the cheapest casket. We got the service was very short, and it's when you have to plan a funeral and you don't know what it entails. It can be shocking. It's really shocking the things they will charge you for. They charge for limousine service. We did not get that because I didn't feel like, come on now, we weren't limousine people before Julian passed. And I had a minivan at the time, and I said my little brother can drive me to the cemetery. So that saved, I think that was about $250, maybe $275 just for limousine service. So you have to think about that. You have to think about the cost of a casket, and we have a nice spring breeze going. It feels like spring out here. Anyway, to be honest, the casket, unless you get it made out of some kind of reinforced steel, it's not going to matter. They're all going to have the same thing's going to happen to the casket, whether you get an $1,800 casket like we did, or you get a $5,000 casket. They just look prettier, but you're going to put dirt on any of them. And if you can afford it and you want the fancy casket, go for it. But another thing was that Julian, even though I felt that we could have had an open casket, the funeral home director would not allow it, even though we were allowed to in the days leading up to his funeral, from the time his body arrived here from North Dakota until we buried him, I would go every day, and they would open it up for the kids and I to spend time with him. And so anyway, there was no question of that. It didn't really matter what the casket looked like on the inside. It was a basic casket. I kind of feel like Julian might have tissed at me that it was kind of pink, but to order the other another color like a slate gray or something would have taken an extra week, and I don't think I would have survived an extra week of his body being there waiting. So we just we took the one that was there. And so anyway, let me talk about funeral preparations. Number one, you have to pick a funeral home. You look for one. You can absolutely shop around. I know that when you're grieving, it's like I can't think straight. I can't have a buddy with you. Bring someone, a family member, a friend, someone who will stand up for you, who has a voice for you when you cannot speak, someone who knows what you want done and will absolutely be there to be able to speak for you when you can't. My mother was there for me, and I'm absolutely grateful to her for being there, because I didn't know. At times I didn't even know what to say. They would ask me questions, and they sound like hard questions. They sound heartless, but it's a business like any other business. Running a funeral home is a business, and they have to ask you questions. What do you want to dress them in, or what is your price range? They're not being cold. They're doing their business. And so you pick a good funeral home. Pick one that is compassionate. Pick one that will work with you if you cannot pay for the entire funeral up front, because I know there are several funeral homes in the county I live in. And the first one that we stopped at, I'm glad they were closed, because I did not want to go there. I didn't like that funeral home, but I was in the state of mind. I was just, my mother said, well, let's try here first, and they were closed. And I said, I want to go to Phillips and Star. And I have been to almost every family funeral that we've had over the years has been there, and I know they're very compassionate. They're very kind people. So we did go there, and immediately he started asking me about where Julian's body was, because Julian was in North Dakota when he died. So he called the funeral home there. The first thing you have to do, if they die in an area, they're away from home, and you're going to have their body shipped, it is a requirement to have it embalmed. So that was the first thing. The funeral home director called there and said, go ahead and embalm him. And then they made arrangements betwixt the two funeral homes to ship his body here, which was in a plane. And then there's the charge for the funeral home going to the airport and picking up the body, the local funeral home. So we made all of those arrangements, and then we began to talk about the funeral itself. And everything is a cost. If you have a service inside of the funeral home, there is an extra charge for that. If you have a graveside service, there is a charge for that. There's a possibility that the pastor that would come out would expect some money. The gravedigger is a separate charge, and this could be different in other places, but where we went, this is how it was. There is they charge if they have to do some kind of work. Julian had to have stitches in his face in order for us to see him. So there was I don't think it was very much that he charged. We were charged for it, though, because I asked them to fix him up. And the funeral home here did that, because the funeral home in North Dakota where they were holding his body said they were not experienced enough to do that. And they absolutely did an excellent job. I mean, for the injuries Julian had, they were wonderful. They did a wonderful job of making him presentable for us to the kids and I to see. And you have to have clothing for your loved one. It's just seems like the right thing to do to dress them, even if their casket will be closed. So my mother helped me find a suit for him. And you don't need shoes. You don't need socks. They typically are barefooted. You need to know where you want to lay them to rest. I was fortunate enough that I did not have to pay for a grave for Julian, because where we buried him, my grandfather used to own the land and built the church that's there. My grandfather's buried there as well, and my grandmother. And so that was given to us. We were given 2 plots so that I could be laid to rest next to Julian. If you don't have a family plot, or you haven't made arrangements ahead of time, you're going to need to find that, and that can be expensive. It can be almost like buying a plot of land to build a house on. It could be upwards from anywhere from $800 to $4,000, and maybe more in other places, but I know here locally that's what we found out before, was decided that we would lay Julian to rest there. You need to plan the service, and if you're grieving and you've had an unexpected death of a loved one, you probably want to involve somebody who will help you with planning that service. I was completely lost. I really was. Julian's service was a little bit erratic, I guess is the word. It was not planned enough. There are not enough Adventist pastors in our area, Spanish-speaking Adventist pastors. So Julian's brother actually arranged to have a pastor come from Charlotte, which is about an hour and a half, 2-hour drive from here. And I was not happy with him, because I know that they like to sing a lot. And when the pastor arrived just minutes before the service in the funeral home, I went back there and talked to him, and I said, one song, only one song. Please do not drag it out. This is not a chance for you to save souls, to have a service. I want you to speak, and that's it. And I was not happy because he did not know Julian. And pastors who don't know the deceased, they tend to rattle on about hoping that he was saved, and then they try to save other souls while they're in there, and they compare, don't be like him. And he did some of that. And if I'd had a bat, I would have stood up and just started whacking him in the head. If I just a rubber bat, just to knock him silly, because I wanted him to shut up, and I was not happy with that. And it's not something you can do over. It's done once it's done. And it upset my children because they began to sing in the funeral home. And we were also told that since we were trying to be on a budget, that we only had the funeral parlor, for just 20 minutes or so. And this, just after the 4th song, I said, stop. Let's do this. Okay. You need pallbearers. You need to make the arrangements need to be made to have at least 4 to 6. With an adult, it would be probably 6 to 8, maybe even, pallbearers to carry the casket out to the hearse. And I chose my brother's, Julian's nephew. I think his brother was, and I barely remember now. Typically they would be dressed alike, or you would want some sort of dress code for them. I mean, you don't want a pallbearer showing up in t-shirt and blue jeans and work shoes, unless that's what you want. But we went and bought shirts for all of the guys, and I think that the pallbearers were white shirts, black tie, and a friend of my mother's donated a carnation for each one of them. If you don't want a lot of flowers, you need to make that known to everybody ahead of time, because that can be a bit cumbersome. It was, and Hispanics don't typically do that with a funeral like we had. Catholics may do it that way, but Julian's people did not bring flowers. There were no flowers, and I was a little bit grateful for that. What his family was doing, instead of bringing flowers for Julian's funeral, they were giving the kids and I things. They gave us money to help with the bills, and to, you know, they brought food. They did stuff like that. I guess that's another thing with a funeral. You know, expect there to be people in your home, so you need to put somebody in charge there. My mother came to me and said, Renee, is it okay if I run things here? And I said, yes. I mean, you know, you don't even have to ask. Mama said, well, I don't want to upset you. I said, no, absolutely. And I just vegged in the recliner in my living room, and my mother took over everything. She greeted people. She cooked. She did the dishes. She was constantly doing something, sweeping, mopping, you know, just, it was such a relief to have her there, because I could not have functioned. I could not have done it. So I think I went through pretty much everything in a kind of zigzaggy way with planning a funeral, but I think my advice to anybody would be to talk about it ahead of time. Just at least, you know, even just, Julian and I didn't have in-depth conversations about either one of us dying. He just would say things like, if I die, you know, if he heard of a friend dying or something, he'd say, if I die, I want this or I want that. One thing, Julian's family, with him being Mexican nationality, they wanted to ship his body down to Mexico. And the kids were like, no, Mama, please don't do that. And I never thought never crossed my mind, because in passing one time he told me when a friend of his had died in an accident and they were really, really struggling to get the money together to ship his body down there, Julian said, I don't want you to do that. I want to be up here with my wife and my kids. Maybe he had premonitions, but he did talk in passing quite often. I never did. I just don't like to talk about things like that. But now that it's happened, it's a wake-up call. You realize we're not promised tomorrow, and life does go on. I mean, Julian's body is resting there in the ground. I believe his soul is in heaven, but it's the life around us goes on. His children are still here. I'm still here, and you have to keep living. And the funeral is just, when you look at it, when I look at it in retrospect, it's a part of life. It's a business. It's a I don't even know the English word for it. The Spanish word's coming to me, but not the English word. It's just business. When it comes down to it, you have to do it. You cannot wait for something to happen. The funeral is absolutely the first thing you have to do when someone you love dies. So, anyway, that went on for a while, but that's it. Peace, guys. Bye-bye.